Yeah, good evening, America, and welcome to everyone listening across the planet. This is the Author and Artist Hour.
It just flowed. I mean, I could go write 10 poems a day sometimes. Sometimes I could go weeks without writing, but then when it came, it just hit me and I was like, bam, 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 bam.
Welcome back to the show. This is the Artist and Author Hour, and I'm your host, Toni. And yet again today, we have an amazing guest to talk to you, and he is launching a fabulous new book in December. But before I introduce you to our wonderful guest, here's what you need to know. If you're listening live on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Everyday Women's Network, or anywhere else where you see this show, don't forget to like and subscribe, particularly if you're watching on YouTube. We love our subscribers. The other thing I want you to know is anything that we talk about today, any information you want to know about our guests will be attached to the show. So just look at the show and you will find show notes accordingly attached. I encourage you, if you miss any replays of the show or you want to catch up on any of the shows across our platforms, please have a look at Toni TV on Binge Networks, Hero Go, Paz TV, and of course the Toni TV channel app available on Android, Apple, LG, Samsung, Roku, Amazon Fire, and everywhere else. And of course the podcast is available across the planet. Now, each and every week, we do a beautiful tradition, which we started in 2022, and it's called A Welcome to Country, and it's Australia's recognition of the special and important role our Indigenous people play in our country's cultural identity. So today, I want to respectfully acknowledge the people of the Yugambeh language region on the Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and I want to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and emerging, and all Torres Strait Islander and Aboriginal peoples listening here or watching today. So today we're going to talk about a wonderful new book called Sunrise in Saigon, a novel for our lifetime. Now, before I introduce you, here's what you need to know about the amazing Patrick Greenwood. Patrick, after military service, embarks on a 25-year career in information technology, working in various roles, including sales, engineering, support, and design. Many of his inspirations for writing came from his business travels across Vietnam, China, Japan, Taiwan, and Portugal. A true believer in listening to one's passion, Patrick started writing early in 2020 based on several trips that he'd done cycling in various countries. His novel, Sunrise in Saigon, Patrick draws upon several non-fictional events that happened in Vietnam, including the war with the US, the last days of Saigon falling, and the chaos in and around the US embassy at that time. He remembered these events as a young man and grew up wanting someday to travel back to Vietnam and visit these places himself. In 2012, Patrick did return to Vietnam and found the lost US embassy and the Catholic nuns that helped with Operation Baby Lift. Patrick followed his passion for cycling by completing several bike tours in Ho Chi Minh City and the Mekong Delta regions. Patrick is the holder of Bachelor and an MBA in Global Marketing, along with completing several postgraduate certificate programs in Information Security, the Internet of Things, and Global Management from MIT. Patrick is married and resides in Carlsbad, California, and I am so delighted to have Patrick on the show today. Welcome to the show, Patrick.
Thank you so much, Toni, for having me. That was a great introduction. I really appreciate it. But thank you so much for having me.
I'm delighted to be talking to you. So, Vietnam is actually one of the places that I've been to a number of times, and it has special memories for me, both around the atrocities of war and the history of the Vietnam War, and then around the people and the food. Vietnam is just, it's a wonderful place to visit. It's a wonderful place to tour. And I'm glad that I get to share these memories and your memories with our audience today. Now, one of your favorite quotes is, "Happiness is not a commodity in life." Can you tell us about that, Patrick?
Well, that actually was part of the motivation of the book. Many times when people are writing historical fictional novels that are inspired by true events, which is how this book was written, it does talk a lot about how people really try to seek happiness. And when they finally achieve it, they either take it for granted, they don't really appreciate it enough, or they realize, I need to cherish this moment. I need to take this as a very special moment. Because many times in life, we do have, gaps in time where we're not happy. And sometimes we should be taking journeys. And part of the motivation of the book was to really take that journey from inside, that desire to go somewhere. Like you've made a trip to Vietnam several times. So you've had the chance to see the people there. And I think one of the motivations of the book was really to kind of share a little bit of the history of Vietnam, share what has happened after the war. What are the people like? And then, of course, what are the people like that actually left Vietnam that went to other countries? So we have a lot of Vietnamese communities here in America as well. And I do touch on some of the interesting things about knowing many of them here as well. But it does really kind of tie to the point of happiness and really what the main character, Jack Kendall, in the book really did to try to get that happiness in his heart.
Yeah, the Vietnamese people are generally very happy people as well. That's been my experience, because not only have I visited a number of times, I've volunteered in the hospitals in and around Ho Chi Minh as well. So beautiful, happy people, and with not very much.
Very, very pleasant. I was very happily surprised in 2012, but I had a lot of wonderful experiences here in America with Vietnamese people going back to my teens. I had the opportunity when I was attending college in Northern Virginia that had a very large Vietnamese community. And being a young man and obviously struggling a little bit in calculus among other courses.
Oh, calculus!
But you select your pain in life, right? So I was working at the time at George Mason University in Northern Virginia, and I was struggling in the library, and I was sitting at a desk and trying to figure out this formula, and just it wasn't there. And this wonderful young lady came over and said, "Don't give up." And she sat down next to me, and she actually helped me figure out the formula of derivative. And I kind of looked at her and said, hey, my name is, my name Patrick Greenwood. Very nice to meet you. She goes, I'm Nguyen Tran. I'm like, oh, where are you from? She goes, I'm from Vietnam. And then she introduced me to a lot of her friends that were in a study group that I ended up joining. So the openness, if you know that many of these people went through so much pain and so much struggle for many years, the kindness in them and the thoughtfulness of them has definitely came through. And I never forget that moment of somebody out of nowhere just sat down to try to help me out of the blue, and I never forgot that.
Yeah. Patrick, let's talk about Vietnam and the Vietnam War. How has your experience in the Vietnam War as a young man impacted on your life?
Well, first of all, I was born in 1964 when it started. And so I remember, being as young as 4 years old and remembering seeing bits and pieces of it on television, of course. But really, when we started getting into 1969 and 1970, when you had more and more people getting drafted, and then you had a lot of people coming back. And obviously, a lot of the soldiers coming back were treated incredibly poorly, not only by the people, but by the government and other people as well. But to really understand Vietnam really took shape for me when I was about 8, when you started seeing, the bombings, and then you started seeing the peace talks starting in Paris. But it wasn't until I was 11, and I remember listening to the radio, and I captured this in the book as well. I remember listening to the radio on April 30th of 1975 when Saigon fell, and how it was like, we interrupt this broadcast to inform you that Saigon is now fallen. And it kind of the announcer said, and thank God, right? It's finally over. And a lot of us were still trying to figure out exactly where this was in the map, right? Where was this geographically, and why were we there? And I scoured through the Washington Post and all the newspapers looking for, what's going to happen from here. And what really caught my eye was the Catholic nuns in Operation Baby Lift, where they made an attempt to try to get the orphans out, and President Ford at the time was behind it, and how the first plane crashed and the second one managed to get out. But I always was intrigued, being raised Catholic, like, whatever happened to those nuns? Why didn't they get out? They could have been on a transport. The Vatican could have gotten them out, or somebody could have gotten them out, but they didn't leave. And that was that driven desire in my heart as a person to say, God, I really someday, would like to go there. So I was in the military in the 1980s, and I was stationed in the Far East as well. And, there was never an opportunity to go to Vietnam because it was still in turmoil. But you would see a lot of refugees coming into the Philippines, other countries, Australia, of course, and United States.
We've got,
and asking them, what do you need? Are you okay? And they always had this incredible, gentle smile to them. And it was just like, no, we're fine. Yeah, we have some food, please, but we're fine. And they pull their families together. They're very family oriented. So the grandmas, the aunts, the uncles, the nephews and nieces, everybody was together helping each other. And I thought I was really moved by that there was so much family camaraderie as well. And that really was another big part of my desire at some point to go to Vietnam in 2012. Was I really needed to see this. I really wanted to. Okay, I've worked with Vietnamese coworkers for years. I work in technology for years. I've been in cyber for years, but never said to myself, okay, now it's time to just pack it up and go. And in 2012, I made that trip.
Yeah. Patrick, your recollections of the war may be different from the historical accounts. And the reason I'm wanting to explore this question was, I know from my own perspective, when I actually went to Ho Chi Minh, or Saigon as it used to be called, the war museum in Ho Chi Minh City is one of the places in all of my travels that I remember very distinctly and very clearly. It had a physical and spiritual impact on me going through that museum. So I'm really curious to explore if you've been there, what you felt, and how your childhood recollection differed from the historical accounts and your visits to Vietnam.
I did have a chance to go to that museum as well in Saigon, and I did see the planes out in front, and I walked through it. Obviously, being an American, there was always so much mystery behind the war, even though it was on the news, it was in the papers. But from a perspective, until you actually physically go to Vietnam and actually see the buildings, the post office, the Notre Dame Cathedral, and obviously the presidential palace, you don't really have a perspective. And so when I was walking through the museum, it was more about, not so much about feeling pain or feeling sorrow. It was more like, oh, really, that really is exactly the way it happened. I really was not moved, Toni, until I took the tour of the presidential palace across the way.
Yes.
And you see the tanks that actually went through. Now, I covered this in the book a little bit as well, but there's a scene in the book that I covered that where the tanks came through the fence and broke the fence down, and those soldiers led the president out of the building. When I was there in 2012 and I went there, the actual tank crews were still there. They reported to duty 25 years later, every day, like it was yesterday. And I didn't know that until I did the tour, and I went around and saw everything and went down to the basement and saw where the president was trying to escape. And I ran into this man, and he was one of the tour guides. And I said, "Is this where the president was taken out?" He goes, "Oh, yes." And he pointed to these four gentlemen and says, "They were the original tank crew." And I'm like, so I walked over and I walked over to him and actually saluted them, because I was ex-military as well. And I kind of looked at them and I asked through my translator who was traveling with me, "Could you please ask them why they do this?" As they felt it's their duty to still report for duty every single day. So even after the war was over, they still had that commitment to protect the palace. And so that was really very moving. And then when I was looking at the pictures on the walls and and I saw that they were leading the president. I saw it in Time magazine as a kid, leading the president outside the palace. The man that let him out was the tour guide that told me to talk to the tank guys. I went back to him and go, Patrick, "Are you the guy?" And he's like, so the commitment, the pride that they take. And so the translator I had with me, the young lady was actually Vietnamese as well. She was actually from the local village, and she's never been there. She grew up in a coffee farm. So she's never been to the palace before. So she's thanking me saying, I have so much pride.
It's pretty special.
Yeah. And it was just So knowing that once you shed the war element and get into
mm,
people to people meeting and communicating, it really was very profound. But at the same time, I felt for them. I've been to the War Memorial in Washington, D.C. on the American side, and you've seen all 58,000 names that are on the wall. But when you understand the Vietnamese side of it, it was 3
yes,
million people that passed away in the
yes,
war. So
yes.
it's amazing to see that they had
Gives a different perspective, doesn't it,
perspective,
Patrick?
and the people were very nice. Even the military that was mining the streets that
Yeah.
were directing
Yes.
traffic were like,
Correct.
they're like this, and I'm like,
Yeah.
whoa, cool.
Mhm.
You know, but it was
Yeah.
astounding. But no, I really think that it was interesting, and I finally found out why they felt that way. And my translator told me in a very, very interesting way. She says, on that day is our unification. North unified
Yes.
the South, South unified the North. Now, granted, there was a lot of ugliness afterwards. There was
Oh,
no,
yeah, there
this was
was.
no roses and
Mm.
parades. But the
Yeah.
reality, though, is that the country did unify. It took several years to get it together. And then you look at it in modern day time.
But
And
they've done well.
exactly. So it did bring an end to a war. Now, why this was so important in modern time is this war ended. Period. It ended.
Yes.
Now,
Ended.
if you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, and you look at
Yeah.
Syria, they never
Yes.
ended. They
Yes.
kept going. So the idea of having something end and having a new beginning is why the Vietnamese people celebrate that April 30th as their kind of
As
their
they should. Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Patrick, did you have the opportunity to visit any of the tunnels? I'm thinking specifically
Chi.
the tunnels of Long
Chi.
Tan,
Yeah.
because of the Australian connection to those particular tunnels. But oh my goodness, they were so tiny, and it was mind blowing to think that they the war was, you know, going on around and above them, and they were in these tiny claustrophobic tunnels.
I did go into the Chi tunnel. I barely fit because I'm 6'1".
Yes.
I could barely fit, but I have seen pictures during my military time of studying the war, and definitely they had entire mini cities underneath, and they had operating rooms, and they
did.
moved between tunnels. But
Fascinating.
it was really like a phenomenal, but it was something that our military wasn't prepared for. And among other things, a lot of things our military wasn't prepared for, but that was a big one, was understanding that this was their home territory, this was their turf.
Yeah.
They knew all trees, they knew where every hole
They
was,
did.
every tunnel was, and our guys were like, well, wait a minute.
And you would have never known. You would have never known what was going on underground, because on the top of the ground, it just looked like just land, land or orchards or what have you, rubber trees, etc.
I did get into one of the holes, but I had to stop because I was too big to get
they're
through.
Tiny.
But I did take the
tiny.
flashlight and do this and kind of look around it as well.
Yeah. Now back to the book, Sunrise in Saigon. The characters of the book, Jack Kendall and Ling Nu, I hope I pronounced that correct, shed light on the toxicity that can exist in relationships in real life. I'm wondering what's important, and why was it important for you to write about these relationships in that way? And was it hard to write in such a way about those toxicities in those relationships?
Well, it's interesting that the book really, from a fictional perspective, really took an account 2 different lives that ended up being parallel, and that you had an older gentleman that was going through a very tragic of life in his own way, and then you had a younger young lady that also was having a very different, tragic life as well through her married life. And by fate calling, they kind of came together for a very brief, romantic time. And obviously, the cover of the book really has a lot of symbol to it, so you can see the cover, obviously.
Yes.
But the Saigon River really was probably the most important part of understanding the story. Was even though they shared a very brief love for each other and a very passionate love for a very short time, throughout the entire book, they always had a river between them. They were trying to find ways to build bridges, say, look, we haven't seen each other in years. I have my married life, you have yours. I'm having my struggles, you're having your struggles. But they always had this goal at some point saying, we're going to find a way to come together. And it just never played out that way. But how each person went back to dealing with their life, and how each of them went through their own, I don't want to say not recovery, but kind of went through their next rendition of life. Jack went one way, and Jack
Sure.
obviously had a conclusion and moved on in life. But Lynn also had to make the decision to stay or go. And in the book, of course, she made her decision on what she chose. And kind of even towards the very end, you're thinking, okay, they're gonna find a way to connect the dots, and that's what made the ending very exciting. But it did take me
Yes.
2 weeks to write the ending, because a lot of my beta readers were like, well, maybe they should, and half said no, maybe we shouldn't, and they shouldn't. Maybe. So anyway, when you read the book at the end, you'll realize you go, okay,
yes, don't say don't give away the ending.
that's the way it kind of played out. But the nice thing is that the storyline does show that even in human life, that even the most beautiful, passionate moments doesn't always last. And for them, it started on 12/12 of 2012, which is once every 1,000 years. So obviously it was very special. But at the end, it was the in every relationship, whether it's a marital or post-marital or external marital affair, somebody moves away first. Somebody is the one to back away. And in this one, as you can tell, Lynn was the one that was starting to back away a little bit sooner, while Jack was thinking, well, I could just build a bridge and we'll come over here and we'll do this. And it was like, well, wait a minute here. I've got these responsibilities, and so do you. But it was very challenging to talk to people that have been through something similar to this, especially with such a large age difference. And many times does it last a week? Does it last a weekend? Does it last 6 months? In this case, their relationship lasted close to almost 17 years. But after that moment of passion in life, it never was the same. So that's why the cover was so important, to know that there was always going to be that river between them.
So that's the significance of the cover. Was it an easy choice with that cover, Patrick?
So I actually shot the cover myself when I was there in 2012. That is actually a sunrise. I was staying in the Renaissance Hotel in District 1, and I was on the 18th floor. And I heard stories of the sunrise on the river is supposed to be incredible. The manager of the hotel told me coming in, make sure you get up early to see the sunrise. So I actually got up before it was still dark, and I was kind of sitting by the window and had my phone camera, and I'm going, I see a boat going by, another boat going by. I see, this going by. And then suddenly the sun started peering up, and I had my camera. Probably took about 7 or 8 shots. And I caught that shot. And then of course that became the cover.
Yeah. It's a beautiful shot, Patrick. Well done. So in talking about war, we can't not talk about the impacts of war. And I'm curious, those memories you had as a young man, and then when you went to Vietnam in 2012, and you've been back subsequently, what do you think were some of the things that were left behind, the scars, if you like, across the land and the people?
Honestly, I did not see very many scars. Everyone from the hotel workers, everybody from the people. I invested in a water company at the time for reasons. I was cycling around in Vietnam, as I mentioned in the book. Jack was a big cyclist as well. And I found a lot of children had darkened teeth, like virtually no teeth. And many of the outlining areas were drinking sugar. And so I stopped my cycling guide at the time and said, why are the children all missing teeth? He goes, well, they drink sugar. Not sugar water, sugar. They would just grind the sugar with rocks, and then whatever came out became their drink, because they couldn't afford clean water. So I found somebody had kind of a water plant in one of the districts, and I went over and cycled near it. And then I said, hey, tell me about how you're doing this. And he had 3 large reverse osmosis tanks set up. And I said, I really have to get behind this. So I actually invested in it to help him clean up his plant and deliver a much cheaper water solution. And we started handing out free cases of water around some of the outlying districts where there was a lot of poor people. And that really was one of the things that I found. Again, you mentioned scars. They were very open to my help. There was no animosity towards, oh, you're an American, we don't trust you. Even though in the book I do kind of.
That's good to know, though.
That in the book as well. There is in the book I do talk about the distrust and things, but in real life I didn't see that when I was there. People were very open. I think a lot of people a lot of the younger generation do not remember the war, and a lot of the history books do not talk about the war. So when I was bringing up subjects like the nuns and bringing up, when the Chinese invaded in 78, they're all like, they don't remember because the government didn't teach that. So in a lot of ways, it was the younger generation was like, who were most of the hotel workers and were the younger crowd. They were like, Americans, I see you guys on TV all the time. It's the
Mm.
older people.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
the older people were just smiling and waving. So no,
Mm.
I didn't get any sense of animosity or any
Good.
score. The scoring part, to your point, I
Mm.
think is more. I think it's not so much the American size. It was the Cambodians. It was the Chinese. It was the economic problems.
Yes.
We were cycling in the Mekong River area, and
Yeah.
I looked over this abandoned like cannery factory that was downriver, and my cycling guy told me, he goes, well, actually Taiwan built that and they abandoned it. Now it's polluting the river. So those are
Oh,
the scars of today. It's the
yeah.
economic boom.
Yes.
It was the solar panel company, First Solar, closed
Yes.
their factory in Vietnam because they couldn't afford to build solar panels there, and that left a
Mm.
open space. So the scarring of today is the economic growth of the 2000s, is the pain,
Yes.
not
Mm-hmm.
the war that ended back in 75 as much.
Yeah, that's actually really comforting to hear, Patrick, that your perspectives on that, because it would be good to know that countries come out the other side of war
Yes.
with some positivity versus the negativity that we tend to read about. So good to know that is your perspective. Now I want to touch back on the nuns and Operation Baby Lift and
Yeah.
what you found out about that project, and how it worked, and how you found the nuns.
Well, the first, of course, that's a great question, Tony, because it really started when I was 11, and they had I guess it was on CBS News, had a piece of showing President Ford carrying a baby off a plane. And so I was intrigued by that, going, okay, this is not one of our most popular presidents. However, he has a soul. And so,
Yes.
and obviously he had a soul to believe in this. So he worked together with the Roman Catholic Church in America and then the diocese in Vietnam to say, what can we do to help get these children out? And that's where the Operation Baby Lift came from. Now, truth to be told, the first plane was a disaster. It was a tragedy that the plane did not make it out, but the second plane did. And I think
Was there a reason, Patrick, for that first plane? Was mechanical?
Mechanical, I think, yeah. And
Okay.
and then the second plane, and then the preceding planes got out, and over 1,500 orphans did get out. Now, which is not a lot, because there was a lot of mixed American babies left behind that were outcasts in society, as you know from the history books.
Yes.
But a good portion got out. The Catholic nuns were the ones that put them in the boxes, put them on the tarmac to help get them on the planes and everything. So when I went there, and as sort of part of my desire to find out whatever happened to them, it took a little bit, because again, if you did a type in their version of Google, it was blocked by the firewall, because that was an old history, and the government doesn't share that. But if you find a way to get around it, like I did, you eventually find that I was
just going to say, Patrick wouldn't be the one to find the way around the firewall. Yes,
I know nothing of cybersecurity. I know nothing about cybersecurity. Nada. I don't hack anything. So I found a way to get around it, and then I found that they were in an orphanage north of the city, and there was one of the hotel workers was Catholic as well. And I said, "Do you know this orphanage? Do you know this church?" She goes, "Oh yeah, I go there every Sunday for mass. Take me with you." So we went there, and I asked her, I said, "Do you know about these nuns?" She goes, "No, but I know who to ask." So she asked one of the older Monsignor nuns that were there, and she kind of pointed to the front of the building and said, "Oh, you've got to go to the front of the building and go through the big iron gates." And eventually, I did, and we eventually found them, and we found 4 of them that were still alive. And that was just like
amazing.
Wow. So I do cover a lot of this in the book. Again, it's part of there's some fiction to it, but the non-fictional event was
elements.
I did find them, and I had spent about 2 or 3 hours with them. And now what was really interesting was that 2 of them spoke French, and so I had to remember high school French, because I remember.
Oh no, high school French is so different.
Well, but a lot of them were there when the French were there in the 50s. So 2 of the nuns were there. They were in their late 80s, and they spoke French, and then one spoke Vietnamese, and then my translator that was with me helped, provide some context. But I had to speak some French, even though I know very little of it. I had enough to sort of get it going. But it was very interesting to hear the stories of, what happened at the airport. They were there when the plane went down. They were there
Yeah.
rushing to try to, find who they could save. They loaded up the second planes. They kept running back and forth between the orphanage and the airport while the city's getting bombed, and and tanks are
Yeah.
coming in and everything. So
Yeah.
they were incredibly brave women. But I waited till the very end to ask, why didn't you leave? Why
Yeah.
didn't you get out? You had a chance to,
Yeah.
to hightail out on the last flight out, and they just said, no, the children got out. And come to find out, a
Oh,
lot of children didn't get out, and so they had to get all the children back to the orphanage. So there was an entire drama of loading them on school buses and everything, pull carts, anything and anything to get the children back into the orphanage area. And while
yeah.
they were doing that, North Vietnamese tanks were rolling right down. And the funny thing was, not funny, but the dramatic thing was, the tanks that were rolling down were the same tanks that turned left and went to the palace, that broke through the gate. So there was this divine
Amazing.
intervention of some form that happened. I cover this in the book as well, about the divine
Yes.
intervention they experienced. But literally, they were literally in the streets with boxes of babies, and they looked up there and they saw the tanks coming, and then the tanks at the last moment veered and went down another road. And those are the tanks that ended up eventually, at the palace. But really, just having those moments and to actually walk on that road and see where this
Yeah.
whole thing came out. It was dramatic. I was very emotional. I actually had a couple of rosaries from my grandmother that I carried with me,
Yes.
and I gave my
Yeah.
rosaries to the nuns. I said, here's my gift to you, for because I've wanted to see them since I was 11, and
Yes.
at that point, but really to witness that. And then on the way out, when the iron doors closed and everything, and I was standing in the street with the translator, I had this really, I don't want to say difficult, but a very challenging sense of emptiness, because I've been waiting so long to find them, that I
And
finally
you,
did. And it took me a
yeah.
moment to get it together, because I really was emotional about, wow, it took you 11 to your 49, to see this, and now what? So
Yeah.
so, and I knew at some point in life I'd have to write about it, and that's kind of why it made it into the book eventually.
Patrick, did you find out what happened to the babies? Did they go out over the globe? Did they just go back to the US? Did they go into further orphanages? What happened to the babies?
Initially went to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines, and then it eventually went to
Ah,
Medina Air Force Base in Okinawa. And then the
mm,
babies, a lot of them were brought to America, some were brought to Europe, and some
mm,
were sent to Canada as well. And
yeah.
then they also had an idea of where the children ended up. The really beautiful story was that the nuns told me is that many of the children have come back. And so
Oh,
they found a way to come back and find us, and they actually created a Facebook group and other social medias over the years to
oh, that's
stay connected to
beautiful.
each other. So the nuns did tell me that many of the children have found a way to come home, and they were just astounded. Now, obviously, they don't remember each other from a face-to-face
No.
perspective, but they remember the feeling. They remember the nuns are explaining to the children, hey, you all were just this big. We put you in little
Mm,
boxes. There was no way.
mm,
There were some that looked maybe 4 or 5 years old, maybe,
mm,
but the most of them were very little small children. And they explained the story of what happened that day. And but they did
mm.
tell me a few of them did make it home.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely. They're very special. The orphanages in Vietnam are very special places to visit, because the children really are, loved and protected as best they can with very little.
Yes. Yeah. Well, so I do cover a piece in the book. I did bring up a
Mm,
non-fictional topic, but a fictional storyline
mm,
on how many of the children are basically kind of adopted
mm,
by countries that are wanting to raise the children to work in factories. And it's a controversial part of the book that I wrote that talked
mm.
about, is this human smuggling, or are they taking children off the streets so they don't become
Yeah.
adopted by the drug lords
Mm,
and they get put to work in a factory making Nike shoes somewhere in Pakistan? And I wrote that
mm.
piece in the book, and a lot of the beta readers that kind of went through that kind of gave me, is this they gave me that kind
Is
of
this-
weird look. I said,
Yes,
but reality is that a lot of these development countries have challenges with
their
how to
children are
deal,
trafficked.
exactly
Yes,
how to
children and
deal with,
babies are trafficked. Yes.
exactly how do they cope with it. So I
Mm,
narrated a kind of a fictional storyline that
mm.
it did take a few of the beta readers to read a few times, and then by the time they read it a third time, they went, Okay, right now I get it. It's either that or they would have been stolen and sold off versus somebody come and grab 20 of them, say, I'm going to put you in a place, I'm going to give you food, give you clothing, give you medical, and I'm going to teach you a skill. The skill is you're going to make Nike shoes. But the fact that you're no longer living on the streets anymore. So and that really does happen in a lot of these development countries. So I do have a piece of that in the book as well about how the children and some of the orphanages could not take care of all the children. Some did end up on the streets as well.
Yeah. And I'm guessing that there would not be as many orphaned babies and children now versus at wartime, but there's still those scenarios still happen, don't they? There's still a need for orphanages, particularly in poor countries like Vietnam.
There is, and that's a great question, a great comment as well, Toni, because when you cycle through Ho Chi Minh City, which is Saigon, there is 13 districts. I cycled through 11 of them, so I know them pretty well. And
I was going to say, it's a big place.
It is, and there's
big and bustling. Gosh, Patrick, I've just got an image of you knowing what the traffic's like and thinking, oh my goodness, how did you manage to cycle through that traffic safely?
Well, so I love cycling. As you can tell by my wall, I've cycled all over the world and everything. I love cycling, and I take it on the plane with me wherever I go. Cycling to me is one of my passions in life, and it always has been. It always is. But what made interesting about cycling in those districts, and it kind of brings to your point about orphanage and poverty. You could be cycling through District 1, and it looks like Singapore. High rises, condos, shopping malls, Starbucks. I was there when the McDonald's opened. I'm like, why? You got the best organic food in the world. Why are you eating this crap? Right. But they opened a McDonald's.
Is everywhere.
And there was a Taco Bell there and a KFC. I'm like, people, you're gonna look like us in 20 years, right? So stay open junk food. But they were lining up for it. But what was interesting though, by riding in District 1, to me it looked like Singapore. And then you ride through District 5, and then you start to get to District 11, and suddenly you're thinking, okay, that's poverty. That's poverty beyond poverty. And District 13 was where the water district was that I invested in. So that was in an outlying area. And so there is you can turn left by the market, and now you're in a very, very challenging place. Children are living on the street. 2 blocks away, they're driving a BMW they just imported. And you mentioned the traffic and the roads. There's 8 million people that live in Ho Chi Minh City. There's 13 million scooters because people have 2 at home. The roads are not made for scooters. They are not made for cars. And these children that dare to get on their bikes and cycle is like, they're like the bravest children alive.
Absolutely.
That's why the proceeds of my book and coffees are going to helmets for kids in Vietnam. So this is actually a helmet that is made in Vietnam. And so the proceeds of my helmet are going to make these helmets. It got started in 2000 by President Bill Clinton when he was there visiting. And the organization to date has made almost 1 million helmets in 20 years, and they've distributed Vietnam, Thailand, India as well. And so to me, being a cyclist, obviously I saw firsthand, the dangers of these kids. So when I started putting the book together, I then looked for a charity that I can align to. And that's when I got contacted to Helmets for Kids in Vietnam. So my proceeds, my book, my coffee and everything all goes to help support the kids. But to see it firsthand, when you have 5-year-olds that are dodging cyclists or the scooters and the cars, and just to see that tragedy. But there is good news that there is help. There is helmet laws in Vietnam now, which are helping it. And obviously having, contributors like myself to help, raise more money to make more helmets is a good thing as well.
Absolutely. I was going to say, Patrick, when I volunteered in the hospitals, the number one issue that they were dealing with was motorbike accidents, and they were just prolific. No helmets, broken bones, legs, arms, all of that. It's a pretty important, and none of them ever used to wear helmets at all, did they, in that traffic?
There's a law, thank God.
Completely scary.
There's a law now, they have to wear it, but it's not for the cycles, it's for the motorbikes. So you can everybody that rides a bike, it's like no helmet.
On the bike, you can you can still kill yourself on a push bike just as much as on a motorbike. But yes, the thought of cycling through that city landscape, My goodness, Patrick, my goodness.
But it was good though. I mean, the good
Yes,
thing was if you want to see it, and by the way, you may not be
you
able to see it,
can
but
see it.
that's my jersey from Vietnam. And it
Yeah,
kind of has a little tagline saying, see Vietnam from, from behind the wheel. And
yes,
really cycling there was the best way to see the country, see the people. Yeah,
yeah.
obviously, I got inspired to get involved in the water business. It inspired
Mm,
me to get into helmets for kids as well.
mm,
But when you
mm.
really come to the country and you see the openness of people and really kind of the warmth of it, even when I was like completely out of like no more energy whatsoever, and I'm on the side of the road, I was sitting
Yeah.
down, I had nothing. An elderly gentleman came up and gave me a cup of tea, and I was so moved by that. And I was like,
Oh,
I kind of like, thank you. So
yeah.
I was sweating and I was,
Yes.
but to see that kindness is definitely, we need
They're
more of that.
very beautiful. Again, I'll say it again. They are the most beautiful people, truly just gorgeous human beings. Patrick, you're still involved with the water project in Vietnam?
No, I sold off in 2016, and
Yeah.
truth to be told, it was open for a year. Actually, the factory
Yes.
was open longer than that, but my involvement was about a year.
Yeah.
It did really well from a standpoint of we created new products.
Great.
We lowered the cost of water so it could be affordable. We started giving away a lot of free water in jugs and sports bottles to
Yeah.
local communities. And then any profits we made per month, we donated them to the Catholic nuns to help support the orphans, and we
Yeah.
donated to some of the Buddhist temples as well. And
Oh,
we did that
fantastic.
for about a year. Now, obviously, in a development country, not everybody plays fair. And as more
Mm,
and more exposure you get, the more people come by going, gee, that
yeah.
looks a little low. You haven't registered your vehicle yet. He doesn't have a license. We need to
Oh.
correct it. So after a few rounds of donations to some local non-charitables, it finally got to the point where that became more dominant than the sale of the water. And
Mm,
so eventually I sold off my piece of it. We sold
yeah.
most of the factory to a scrapyard who ended up doing
Yeah.
something with the metal as well. But everything I sold from the scraps, I divided between the temples and the Catholic nuns as well,
Mm,
and left and gave money to the workers as well, and
mm.
thanked them for what they did. But for a good year, every month, it was very nice
Good.
to see how many waters we're selling and how much donations we were giving to the causes.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Um, the helmets for kids, was that something that you just stumbled upon by virtue of you cycling through Vietnam, or had you known about it before you went?
Didn't know. I didn't really know until
Mm,
2019. I was
yeah, okay.
So I started writing the book in 2019 and during COVIDism, and I was still working in technology at the time, and I
Mm,
really was getting kind of sick of working in technology. I was in it 27
mm.
years, and I said, you know what, so time to
Enough.
shift gears and move left. So I started writing full time, and the first thing I did is I broke out the yellow note paper and I just started
Yeah.
writing the book. And I was
Mm,
basing on memory of trips and things. When the book got picked up by a publisher, it got picked up by Austin
mm,
Macaulay Publishers out of New York. I was obviously
mm,
extremely thrilled to be signed as a writer.
mm,
But the next thing I thought about was, okay, what else what do you really want to do with this? Where do you see this going? And I started researching on helmets for kids, and it brought up helmets for
mm.
kids in Vietnam, and I did the whole background, and I realized that not only was President Clinton involved early on, but Senator John Kerry was involved. And then in 2018, the actress Michelle Yeoh became the global ambassador for the program. So that was like, okay, this is really sounds great. And of course, I had a chance to meet the founder, Greg, before, and so it just seemed like this is a great
It
organization.
was good. Yeah.
So the first thing that came out was I started coming out with coffee mugs. So, and it's
Yes.
like my coffee brand that I have, and my logo, of course, as well. And at the bottom, making, espresso, one espresso at a time. And then I
Yeah.
released a coffee brand with different coffees. This is actually the one called obviously Sunrise and Saigon Coffee as well.
Yeah.
So I slowly,
I was gonna ask you, how did you get into coffee? But
yes,
I'll
so
do that in a minute.
so coffee was the first two products that I started selling, and then I've raised almost $1,800 so far since May, and I've donated back to Helmets for Kids. Now with the book coming out on November 30th, the proceeds
Yes.
from the book as well. But I really wanted to start kind of getting the thing going. So the coffee mugs were first, then I had coffee second, and then obviously the book will be coming out as well.
Yeah.
And then the good thing is that since I donated some money, they've made almost 180 helmets so far. So, and that's
Fantastic.
May of this year. So my goal is to next year is to have 1,000 helmets made for the children. But yeah, I did some research. I was very pleased with the organization. They're a great group of people. I'm just very, very proud to be able to support them.
Oh, amazing, amazing, Patrick. So do you think that you'll continue, I just had an idea then, you could almost do a cycling book tour, but then again, it's hard to transport the books on the bike. So you'd need a backup crew to transport the books with your biking, cycling book tour.
Well, that's kind of that's how my logo came about. So on the book,
Yeah.
that's what cycle rider. So it has the pen running through the bike. So, so actually I have 7 books total, and you kind of see on my shoulder, I've got the different covers of the other ones that are coming out.
Yeah.
My next one is due out next July, which is Codename Dragon Vault. That's actually going to be a fictional novel as well. It's going to deal with Bitcoin hacking, kind of gets into my cyber background. Jack Kendall does survive, and he moves on to the
that was my next question.
Jack moves. Lynn will not move on until book 6. He shows up later in Paris. But in the next book, it really goes more towards my cybersecurity and Bitcoin background as well, which obviously is perfect timing with the the way of the world right now. But yeah, I do have a second one coming out next year. Now, I'm going to be using so Helmets for Kids will always be tied to Sunrise in Saigon.
Sunrise in Saigon, yes.
Codename Dragon Vault is actually going to have a similar charity in Taiwan. So every book I'm writing, and then the one after
will
that
go to a charity.
Exactly. So the third one is actually going to be over there, which is called Shores of Okinawa. That actually has a charity in Japan. So every book I've written is in a different country that has something to do with cycling, hacking, Bitcoin, right? So, but every one of the books will have a charity specific. So I'm looking for Helmets for Kids in Taiwan, and one in China, and then obviously one in Hungary as well. But as many books as Saigon are sold, the proceeds will always be going to the ones in Vietnam.
Fantastic, fantastic. Patrick, I'm curious to know what the process was to get your publisher on board. So how did that go for you? Did you pitch to them? Like, how did that work for you? Because all authors have a different publisher story. So I'm really curious about yours.
So it's a great question, because I've seen some of your other interviews as well, and everybody has a different perspective of a publisher, and many times foul language. Many times it's foul language we can't say on television. But many publishers, when I sent query letters out, I got the usual rejection letters and things, and I didn't take it personally at all. But also Macaulay was coming out of I would say more of a controversial time. They were in 2015. They were labeled as a vanity. They had a lot of bad press coming out of the UK. And so when I talked to them in 2020, when they got my manuscript, they showed up with, this is how much it's going to cost. And everyone said, whoa, if this is a legitimate publisher, you shouldn't be paying them, they should be paying you. But tragedy be spoken, you still have to hire an editor. You still have to pay for the cover. You still have to.
I was just going to say, books take a lot of money to get out of your head and into a physical book. Right. The landscape of publishing has changed completely in the last few years. So which is, I actually think is quite a good thing, because it actually means that anyone out there listening can write a book and get it published by a publisher. And of course, we would all like big name publishers, but does it matter? Your book is being published. You have readers. Does it matter? Yeah.
Well, no, you hit it beautifully, dear, very much. It's about getting your book out. And so I looked at it as, okay, I still have to pay this money because I need the hardback, I need obviously the paperback, I need an ebook, and I need an Audible book. If you add up the cost of all 4 of those compared to what Austin Macaulay was going to charge, I said, okay, I'm going to go with them because they're going to get the book out. Now, the good thing is when I did my research with them after 2015, and I started looking at them in 2018 and 19, and I actually went and bought almost 40 of their books off their website, and I read all 40 of them. And I started looking at the quality of their work going, you know what? Good quality, good editing, good covers, good legal work. All the ISBN numbers were accurate. So everybody that in publishing was sort of like, oh no, you don't want a vanity. Well, wait a minute. They're not a vanity anymore. They actually became a full-blown publishing house, and I've had
Correct.
incredible experience with them over the last 2 years. They've been wonderful. The editing's been great. Communication is great. Right now we're talking marketing with them about, what are we going to do, podcasts together, what we're going to do, get ready for the big launch. But now the book is out, coming on November 30th. I got all the pre-copies shipped to me last week. I've got more coming.
Oh, that must be exciting.
I'm beyond words. I got to deliver a copy to my mother over the weekend in DC. It was incredible. I signed it for her and everything. And so book one is out. Book one is hitting. Now the other 4 over here, I have to make a decision if I'm going to self-publish or am I going to work with Austin Macaulay. And I'm in conversations with them to say, look, I've got 7 books. I know you guys like doing one at a time, and I think I'm okay with that. But at the same time, I want to make it look at the options. But to get your first book out, get it done with a professional firm. Austin Macaulay has been fantastic.
Yeah. And it's a big undertaking. I'm not sure that people realize that the time and energy that goes into writing a book, and then all the processes along the way, it just never stops. So there's beta readers, and there's editors and editors and editors and editors. Then it gets close to the end, and you'll go through, and there'll be you'll find a missed capital or a misspelt word, and it's back to the drawing board. And then there's the cover and the presentation and the fonts, and there's a lot involved in producing a book. I know the formatting drove me crazy, Patrick.
So this is 285 pages. When I wrote this, it was 126,000 words, and I was thinking this was going to be thin. It wasn't going to be. When this showed up last week, I'm like, and I thought, it is. So I was kind of blown away. But again, because they're pros, they know this has to fit on the bookshelf at Barnes and Noble. It's got to be sold through Amazon, and that's what you're paying for. So if someone came to me saying, "Should I trust them? They know what they're doing. You're going to get a finished product. Go buy some books." I always tell writers, if you really want to see what it's like to work through them, go on their website, buy a few books, austinmacaulay.com/UK. Go on there and buy some books and read them. And if you think the book is, then fine, move on. But they were very, very nice. Now, the funny thing was, after I signed with them and I started moving transcripts back and forth, the one challenging thing I always encourage people that are writers, have multiple people edit your book. Because
definitely, I did that too, Patrick. I had 4, I think. I worked with one predominantly, and I picked her because of her background across psychology, writing, and editing. And then the others were, structural edits, story, there's whatever part of the book you can think of, there's an editor specifically for that. But it makes a difference to your book, doesn't it?
And don't pick people that love you. Pick people who don't even know you. And that's what
you want them to challenge you.
You want people to look at that going, look, I have no clue who you are, man. But and you want them to really come at it as hard as possible. Now, with that being said, I did have my own experiences with editors where they came back. Now I'm dyslexic. I've been dyslexic since I was a child, so I was not built right, but I still okay. Life is good.
I get that.
But the funny thing was, they would come back and say, "Oh, your prepositions were this." I go, "I'm out." Did you get the story? Did you get Jack and Lynn doing the? Did you get it? Well, yeah, but let me get back to this. This preposition. I had to move your verbs over here, and I'm like, it's not 5th grade, lady. Drop the red pen, And finally, it took me like 3 hours of just saying, "Look, you're not getting it. I want you to help me know that I structured this right. Did you read it? Did you
and the rest can come, can't it? It doesn't.
Sometimes editors can be the most finicky, but you need them.
Oh,
they need you. You need each other. You want to find product. But the point of the publisher is to have that fine NQA, that quality assurance at the end. And Austin did a phenomenal job on the QA. They came back multiple times, says, "We're not getting the ending." And I'm like, okay, why not? Well, we think you should end it this way. I said, no, it's got to end this way. And to be transparent, they were very cool about it eventually. Now, at the beginning, they wanted to really dictate the middle, the ending, this should be this way because we think it'll sell. I go, yes, but it's not how the story should be. And so as a writer, you still have to own the story. And
you do, and you have to, and there's moments where you have to back yourself too, and actually push back and go, well, actually, no,
Yes.
this, you're taking it this way and it's actually meant to go this way. So sometimes you have to, and it took me a long while, I must say, to grasp that I could push back and go, yeah, no, that's not the way I want to write this particular section of the book. It needs to actually be this, this, and this. So there's a whole lot of learning, isn't there, Patrick?
Well, I agree. And I saw one of your interviews you did with a gentleman that was very fascinating, that he talked about how he was thinking about, it wasn't about the publishing, it was about the continuum after the book was out. And
Yes.
one of the things I always talk to my fellow writers about, I also host a podcast as well. I host one on Saturdays called Writers.
Yes, I know. I had a look.
That's right, you do follow it.
Already checked that out.
Thank you. But on that podcast, to your point, I do talk to the writers about their experiences, and always I tell them, you have to have a continuum. It isn't about the day the book comes out. It's about there's
a lot more afterwards.
Agree.
Patrick.
But what's your expectation? I interviewed a young lady a few weeks ago who wrote the book, A Place to Take Root. She was a wonderful Korean student. And I've known her personally on a personal level. And I always ask her, what's your continuum? What's your plan after the book's released? And she's like, I'm going to go on vacation. I go, that's not the continuum. As a writer, I always encourage writers to think about, is your expectation to be John Grisham, or is your expectation to have the book come out and know that you can respect your own story? And you have to remember that when you look at the book sales and you're only sold 10, you thought you sold 100 or whatever, and you're starting to stress going, no one ever read my book. You did. You read it.
And that's the thing that matters the most. You wrote it, you read it, it's done. And yes, it would be wonderful for all of us to be international bestsellers, but that doesn't always happen. And you have to actually, you're right, Patrick, you actually have to think about that. What's next? I've just glanced down at the time and thought, oh my goodness, I've had so much fun talking to Patrick. I'm completely out of time. And we need to talk about quickly the launch date, where they can get the book and the proceeds of the book. One last time, go, Patrick.
Absolutely. So the book is launching on November 30th. You can go to sunriseinsaigonnovel.net and buy it there. You can do a pre-order today. I do have a pre-order link that you can order. And this weekend, because this is Flash Friday and Cyber Monday, 35% off all paperback as well. All proceeds of the book and the copies are going to Helmets for Kids in Vietnam. I have a little video up on my YouTube channel as well that shows it. But no, I love being on the show.
And we have the links in the attached to the talking points today. Otherwise, just type in Sunrise in Saigon in a Google search and it will go directly back.
Sunrise in Saigon novel, and it'll take you right to novel.net. And that's the website. There's a pre-order button available today. You can order the book. All proceeds. Please do. Oh, no, please. It's a great book. A lot of fun. It was great writing it. But I have to tell you, Toni, I'm a huge fan of you, and I thank you for having me on your show. And this is a great. I know we've been working on getting on this show for a while. So thank you for having me.
My pleasure. I'm so glad it's finally at this point for you, but I actually know that there'll be so much more for you. Patrick Greenwood, thank you so much for spending time with us today. I can't wait till we chat again soon. Bye for now, everyone. Thanks, Patrick.
Thanks for having me.
Good evening, America, and welcome to everyone listening across the planet. This is the Author and Artist Hour.
It just flowed. I mean, I could go write 10 poems a day sometimes. Sometimes I could go weeks without writing, but then when I came, it just hit me and I was like,